There's a peculiar irony, isn't there, in the fact that an industry built on the power of words so often finds itself undone by words themselves. And the latest fracas at GB News is an all too familiar example of what happens when the line between free speech and harmful rhetoric is blurred beyond recognition. Josh Howie, who doesn't seem to me to be a very nice man, Josh Howie's remarks on the Headliners programme. I think the word headliners probably could come in for some sniggering or smut, couldn't it? Linking the LGBTQ plus community to paedophilia has triggered over 1,227 official complaints to Ofcom, with additional complaints looming in the form of a petition spearheaded by the Good Law Project. The scandal isn't merely about a single ill-judged remark, but about the broader failure of editorial oversight and the misuse of faith as a shield for discrimination and the limitations of broadcasting regulation in an era of sensationalist media. To return to the quotation at the heart of the discussion, being Christian is not an excuse to be patronising or unkind, and being a broadcaster is not simply an excuse to parrot prejudice. And the quotation that I want, actually, I can't repeat the quotation because the quotation is so appalling, and it's part of this sort of right-wing obsession with feeling that there's a duty to be unpleasant, to be unkind, to be nasty. This sentiment about the job of a broadcaster to be kind, not to be patronising, not to parrot prejudice. This is what I think needs to be promoted. The issue is not, as Howie and GB News would have it, about a comedy show being taken out of context, nor is it about the so-called perils of cancel culture. It's about responsibility, and if one's role is to comment on the news, then surely that requires an engagement with facts, not a repetition of decades-old homophobic slurs dressed up as humour. Ofcom's broadcasting code is clear, and Tom Howard really should have stepped in to stop this nonsense, and I don't know quite why he didn't. Ofcom isn't really equipped to deal with this sort of problem. It can register the problem, but it can't stop it. And broadcasters themselves must protect the public from harmful and offensive material, particularly when it comes when it crosses into the realm of disinformation, as this did. And Howie should be taken off the air. He should be taken off the programme. One might have expected that, faced with such an outcry, Howie's comments would have been swiftly and unequivocally disavowed. Instead, GB News has chosen to circle the wagons, claiming that the outrage is part of a deliberate and orchestrated campaign by the Good Law Project. It isn't. It's an old trick, of course. When in doubt, claim victimhood, but this is not a witch hunt. This is a problem of GB News' own making. And the backlash is about more than one moment of reckless speech. It's about how easily discredited narratives can seep back into public discourse when left unchecked. For decades, the false equivalence between homosexuality and paedophilia has been a favourite weapon for those opposed to LGBTQ plus rights, and it was deployed to resist the decriminalisation of homosexuality, used as a scare tactic against equal marriage, and resurfaces whenever progress is made. To smuggle such a sentiment into mainstream broadcasting under the guise of a joke is not only dangerous but cynical. Howie, for his part, has attempted to argue that the comment was aimed at the church, not the LGBTQ plus community. But if so, why make the link at all? His protestations ring hollow, particularly given that GB News, in its response, didn't distance itself from his words, but instead lashed out at the critics. The distinction between criticism and complicity is a thin one, and in this case the broadcaster has veered towards the latter. And what are the co-presenters? I'm sorry, as I say, that Josh Howie wasn't interrupted or pulled off by Tom Harwood, who knows better. I was going to say that Tom Harwood should have pulled rank, but I'm told that someone told me the other day that's a rather disturbing innuendo. So just leave it at this. Tom Harwood should have pulled off Josh Howie, and that should have been the end of it, but he didn't. It's a curious indictment that Harwood, typically more restrained than some of his colleagues, didn't intervene, and therein lies a crucial failure of editorial oversight. Live broadcasting is unpredictable, but its practitioners are not supposed to be bystanders when the conversation veers into disinformation and prejudice. That Howie was neither stopped in the moment nor immediately repudiated afterwards suggests complacency or complicity. And Ofcom's role in this saga is now pivotal. Its approach to regulation is often cautious, rightly so, but this is not a time for equivocation. If the regulator is to maintain credibility, it must determine whether Howie's comments violated its code, and crucially ensure that the response carries more weight than a mere wrist slap. If the watchdog fails to act decisively, it risks setting a precedent where such slurs become permissible under the flimsy defence of comedy or context. This isn't about shutting down debate or suppressing free speech. Rather, it's about ensuring that a national broadcaster does not perform, does not provide a platform for its performances for the very prejudices that one High Court has recently ruled remain one of the oldest, most pernicious, and most stubbornly ineradicable falsities of homophobia. Ultimately, this episode is a stark reminder that words have consequences. Whether wielded by bishops, broadcasters, or commentators, they shape public discourse and influence attitude. So we go back to pulling rank. I mean, that would have been appropriate. Not in the sense of professional hierarchy, but in the sense of exercising responsibility. And that responsibility, however, in this case, was conspicuously absent, and its absence continues, and its absence has ignited a firestorm. Now it falls to Ofcom to decide whether this sort of rhetoric can continue to masquerade as commentary, or whether finally it's time for real accountability in broadcasting. And just as a postscript to this, I think it's important to notice that the original issue on which this was based, which is a Christian social worker who overstepped the mark, was also misinformed. Those people who regard it as their mission to speak out against homosexuality because of quotations from the Bible. I think it's 6 in the Old Testament and 6 in the New. These quotations need to be contextualized, and they need to be interpreted within the spirit of the Christian mission, if Christianity is what is being endorsed. And the Christian mission is about charity. And I urge anyone who is worried about this to look at my 3-part video on homosexuality, what would God say? And I'll leave a link for that at the bottom of this video. It's quite a long video. It can come in 3 parts, but I think I've done a version which puts them all together. It's a little academic, but I've gone through each of the, I think, 12 texts and pointed out that each text means something slightly different to what the evangelical bigots would claim. And I have no problem with evangelical Christianity, but I have serious problems with people who want to twist words to mean what they want them to mean. If the understanding of Acts of the Apostles that that Jesus replaces the law is correct, then quoting obscure bits of Deuteronomy, cherry picking one prohibition over another, is simply absurd. There are texts in the New Testament which are difficult, particularly one in Timothy. But I've gone through this. Do check this out if you're in any doubt about the position, because I think the idea that Christianity should take a stand against homosexuality is absurd, utterly absurd. And the idea that this should be peddled on what is effectively a mainstream broadcaster is equally absurd, and it needs to be called out.